Chest up, shoulders back. This is Revival Fitness, and if you consume fitness content, even in a more modest capacity, I'm sure you have seen how Mike Mentzer has risen to prominence. It seems now that it's cooled off a little bit, but as I talked about in my recent video about so-called science-based lifting, the biomechanics brigade, that side of the science, they have really ran with the lower volume side of things. And as you've probably seen too, a lot of content creators now are jumping on the low volume bandwagon. And of course, we have to begin with the obligatory #revival was right. I was telling you guys years ago, even before the Mentzer content really rose to popularity again, that the 10 to 20 set per week thing is foolish. It is far too broad of a range. We'll talk about that more coming up in a second, but I have not jumped from side to side with this. I was never a so-called high volume advocate, ever. A lot of people now who have been high volume in the past, they're now so-called seeing the light, and they've tried low volume, and they talk about how, oh, they've made great gains from it now. Never in the past, only now, since it's popular and established again. Totally a coincidence, I'm sure. And Jeff Nippard is the most popular example of this. He has recently talked about switching to pretty low volume, especially in comparison to his past training. He was a typical 10 to 20 set per week guy for years. He parroted that same tired line, as so many people do, not just him, and now he's all about low volume, and he's put out a low volume program at the same time. Go figure. If you recall in Solomon Nelson's recent video, on that ridiculous women's program that Jeff put out, it was over 50 sets per week for the glutes. And Jeff commented, defending that, saying a lot of so-called science guys at the time were promoting very high volume. A few science guys said so the science says so, apparently. Even back then, that was never advocated by any legitimate science. It still is not. And even if that was years ago, people can change their minds, of course, but nobody scientifically minded, or even just smart in general, would ever advocate that much volume. When it comes to my take on volume, as I said, 10 to 20 a week, I don't like it. The range itself is double. That is a huge variance in of itself. And of course, most lifters, especially novices, that consume this type of content, they're going to gravitate to 20, or very close to 20, because innately we think that more is better. The range that I generally advocate is about 8 to 12 sets per muscle group per week. And realistically, 5 to 6 sets per week will definitely work. For myself right now, I'm doing about 8 to 9 sets per week per muscle group, maybe up to 10 on given things, but no more than that. And if you could not grow sufficiently and reliably, and I would argue maximally, on 9 to 10 sets per week, there is something seriously wrong with your training. Going up to like 12 to 13, I think it's unnecessary, but you could still manage that if you want to, and if you just like training more. 14 to 15, I think, is really the high end, especially like 16. I don't advocate that at all under really any circumstance. At that point, you really just like training and going through the motions, which if you like that, by all means be my guest. But it's not optimal, and it's certainly not necessary. Then going upwards of 20, or at 20, that's just dumb. There's no reason to ever do that. And like I said, if somebody actually is pushing 20 sets a week or above, they're not training hard on a set-by-set basis, because they cannot be by default. The higher your volume is, the lower the intensity must be per set within that volume. The only way you can push very high intensity, like under 1 rep in reserve on every single set, is you're going to have to drop the weight across the sets. And eventually, sometimes even by simply the 3rd or 4th set, the weight reduction is going to be so significant that it's going to be outside of the working range that you really should be in, given your current strength level. You're just getting a pump at that point for the sake of it. And something I've told you guys as well, whenever you see these dudes that claim natural, but they're training with high volume, high intensity, and high frequency at the same time, you found a liar, because that does not add up. Even doing high volume and high intensity concurrently, That is really not feasible to pull off for any serious length of time. I will die on this hill. Nobody is growing optimally, doing upwards of 20 sets per week, per muscle. Not even the most enhanced guy on earth. Now, can that work? Sure, it can. You're not going to just never make any progress doing so, and of course the more enhanced that somebody is, the more leeway that they have recovering from all of that volume, but is it optimal to do so? No, it's not. You will get the most out of your training, your recovery, and maybe most importantly, your time, when you realize this is about quality, not quantity.
Progress should not be an unpredictable, irregular phenomenon. If you're training intensely enough to stimulate growth, if you're working out too long and too frequently, you will short-circuit both the recovery and the growth process.
And this is something I still see in the gym and online very routinely. So many lifters still prioritize their volume above everything else, and their intensity suffers because of that. This is a faulty way of training. And it's also faulty to only prioritize total testosterone when it comes to blood work, even though so many guys do that as well. Testosterone in isolation is always focused on, and understandably so, because it drives protein synthesis, muscle mass, fat metabolism, and metabolic rate. That said, total T is not the only metric we should care about, nor is it the only thing that really matters in the complete hormone profile. Even so, there's no way to actually know these things without fancy lab equipment and medical professionals. But thankfully, you don't need to schedule a doctor's appointment to learn more about your health anymore. If you want to get a full picture of your health with blood work or other lab tests, my sponsor, LabCorp On Demand, offers over 80 tests you can choose from. And the process is very easy. Go to trylco.com/revival and use code REVIVAL to purchase your desired tests, then make an appointment or walk in to one of LabCorp's 2,000 plus patient service centers across the United States for your sample collection. I've used LabCorp myself in the past. It is a seamless process. It's easy to schedule. You're in and out within about 10 to 15 minutes. It's something that you could realistically do during your lunch break at work, or schedule it in to a day when you're running errands. And the staff takes great care of you as well. And the next time I go, I'm going to get the comprehensive testosterone test. That gives an encompassing look at not only total T, but free T, albumin, and SHBG. Free testosterone is the readily available form in the body. And even if total testosterone is in the normal range, or even high, if free T is low, that can manifest as low T symptoms. Albumin is the body's most abundant blood circulating protein that carries testosterone and other hormones, and notably, out-of-range levels of albumin can indicate liver, kidney, or thyroid issues, and SHBG, sex hormone-binding globulin, is a protein produced mainly in the liver, and if this is high, more testosterone will bind to it, resulting in less free T available for use. When you test, your sample will be collected using the same methods as the doctor's office. There's no need to prick your own finger. Testing is performed at LabCorp's CAP-accredited, CLIA-certified clinical laboratories that typically process 3 million samples every week. You can even skip the waiting room and wait outside or in your car until the lab technician is ready to see you. You will be notified of your results by email when they're ready to be viewed, often as early as the next day. You'll be able to clearly see them in your confidential LabCorp On Demand patient account online. And if any steps require prompt attention, you'll be contacted by phone with the best steps going forward. So stop playing the guessing game. Get the insights that you need to live the life that you want. Go to trylco.com/revival and use code REVIVAL to get 20% off your lab test today. And something to keep in mind as well, it's not just Mike Mentzer that has led to the rise of low volume again. There is scientific basis for this. And there is one paper and one section of one paper in particular that a lot of these people cite because it raises a lot of eyebrows when you really look at it. And guess what? I have found the paper. Don't worry, we're not going to read the entire thing because you're going to click away and I'll fall asleep, but we're going to cover the key points of this. So it's called the Resistance Training Dose Response, Meta-Regressions Exploring the Effects of Weekly Volume and Frequency on Muscle Hypertrophy and Strength Gain by Joshua Pelland et al. And this is a recent paper, by the way. You can see down below here it's in September 2024. But let's do like the typical science-based content creators. We will skim over some of the abstract and the results and things objective before meta-analyzing the volume and frequency research. So they're going to analyze a bunch of studies at once. I guess that's good overall. All contributing resistance training sets were classified as direct or indirect, depending on their specificity to the hypertrophy/strength measurement. A series of multi-level meta-regressions were performed for muscle hypertrophy and strength, utilizing 67 total studies of 2,058 participants. All models were adjusted for the duration of the intervention and training status. Results: the posterior probability of the marginal slope exceeding 0 for the effect of volume on both hypertrophy and strength was 100%, indicating that gains in muscle size and strength increase as volume increases. However, both best fit models suggest diminishing returns, with the diminishing returns for strength being considerably more pronounced. Conclusions: the dose-response relationship between volume and hypertrophy appears to differ from that with strength, with the latter exhibiting more pronounced diminishing returns. The dose-response relationship between frequency and hypertrophy appears to differ from that with strength, with only the latter exhibiting consistently identifiable effects. And keep in mind too, guys, as we talked about here recently, there's so many flaws with exercise science. A meta-analysis of a bunch of crappy papers is just a big pile of crap. This applies to any meta-analysis of any field. Garbage in, garbage out. But now we have to go down and look at this right here. Control-adjusted marginal effects for fractional weekly set volume. The blue is for hypertrophy, and the orange is for strength. So we can see here, weekly set volume per muscle group, we have 0, 10, 20, 30, and 40. And then this up here is the response ratio, percent change, and muscle size. And it goes up relatively linearly. There's a small bump here, then it kind of slows down, but it's noticeable how it goes up the entire time, right? So the more and more sets that are done, according to all of the studies that they analyzed, the more that hypertrophy, just the size of the muscle itself, goes up. Interesting to note there. Now let's go down and look at the control-adjusted effects for weekly set volume with strength. Big difference. Weekly set volume here only goes from 0 up to 30 in increments of 10. And then we have the percent change and maximal strength. And this goes up noticeably. And then right around, this looks to be about 6 sets or so. And then it completely flatlines, or almost completely flatlines. It tails off extremely noticeably. We get to 10, 20, 30. I mean, there's really no difference at this point. And this enormous disparity is what has led a lot of people in the biomechanics brigade, and I think they're correct, to conclude that the muscle size or hypertrophy measurements are skewed because of edema and water retention. And realistically too, if you think about it, how could you possibly gain and keep gaining muscle mass over the course of weeks if your strength is not improving in some form? This data is very hard to defend on its own. So now they have these plotted out into tables as well. This one in the blue, volume efficiency tiers for hypertrophy. They call minimum effective dose 4 sets, sufficient to elicit detectable hypertrophy. Higher efficiency, they say, is 5 to 10 sets. Roughly 6 additional weekly sets required for detectable hypertrophy. Intermediate efficiency, 11 to 18. About 8.5 additional weekly sets for more hypertrophy. Lower efficiency, 19 to 29. There's a difference of 10, yet again, similar to 10 to 20. Huge range. About 10.75 additional weekly sets required for more hypertrophy. Lowest efficiency, 30 to 42. About 12.5 additional weekly sets required for more detectable hypertrophy. Then unclear, they say 43 plus. Insufficient data. Well, yeah, who the fuck is possibly doing over 40 sets per week? Oh, that's right, Jeff Nippard's women's program. But this is interesting because even in this chart, They say higher efficiency is 5 to 10, as they call it, so-called fractional weekly sets. 5 to 10 lines up with what I was talking about earlier. Of all of these ranges listed here, 5 to 10 is the one that I would definitely vouch for. Then we go to table 2B in the orange, volume efficiency tiers for strength. So tier number 1 they call minimum effective dose. That is 1 weekly set, sufficient to elicit detectable strength gain. Higher efficiency is 2 sets per week, about 0.5 additional weekly sets required for detectable strength gain. Intermediate efficiency is 3 to 4, about 2.25 additional weekly sets required. Then lower efficiency, they say 5 to question mark, so just 5 plus. Additional weekly sets do not consistently enhance strength gains greater than SDES. SDES is the smallest detectable effect size, according to them. So simply going off of the numbers listed in the fractional weekly sets category for both of these, whenever you read this one in the orange, I did this myself too, just reading it now. I thought about this as frequency because the numbers are so low, like 1 time a week, 2 times a week, 3 to 4, right? This is weekly sets. I mean, the disparity in these numbers is kind of astonishing. It simply does not make sense. Now let's read this part though. Limitations and considerations. Several limitations and considerations exist with this meta-analysis. While we have described and quantified the dose-response relationships, it should be emphasized that these relationships are limited to the contexts of the included studies, i.e. training variables, participant characteristics, etc. Revival was right, like I told you guys. For instance, proximity to failure appears to be an important variable for maximizing muscle hypertrophy. However, although 78% of hypertrophy effects reported some form of a failure definition, only about 30% of those had a clear definition of momentary failure. Additionally, our moderator analysis on proximity to failure and other variables are extremely limited. Direct research is necessary to determine whether increased hypertrophic effectiveness per set influences the functional, there's the F word, functional form of the dose-response relationships. Well, of course it does. And on top of that too, if your muscle size is supposedly increasing with that volume going so high, but the measured strength is flatlining, how are you gaining that muscle? Oh, and speak of the devil, here we go. Limitations also exist with the dependent variables used in the present analysis. For instance, while only direct measures of muscle size were used, which are likely more sensitive to hypertrophy, other factors may influence muscle size measurements. For instance, edema, sufficient to confound muscle size measurements in the days following training, has been reported in novel, highly damaging eccentric training protocols. While edema is unlikely to be a major confounder in trained individuals, following an 8-set training session, that's debatable, but they have a citation, well 2, at least, or in previously untrained participants by the end of a typical training study, cautious interpretation of the present results is warranted. This is especially notable given the paucity of data exploring edema's effect on muscle size measurements following higher volume resistance training. That's another good point too. Credit to these authors for mentioning this. The more volume you do, the more inflamed your muscles are going to be, the more water you're going to hold. That's going to skew the data. And realistically, especially depending on when you measure them after the workouts, that could really skew the data. And this ties into something I've told you guys yet again for a number of years now. I was saying it even whenever I was new to this platform. This entire notion of, oh, I train for size versus training for strength. There is no real way to separate them, naturally speaking. Even on steroids, you could separate them more so to some extent, but especially naturally, they are intertwined. They are linked together to a massive degree. And people still talk about, oh, well, I train for hypertrophy, not strength. Well, how are you possibly going to gain hypertrophy without getting stronger? It does not make sense. When people say strength, they automatically think of, oh, powerlifting, 1-rep maxes. That is a type of strength. It's like when people say, oh, bulking makes you fat. Well, what kind of bulking? All bulking? Well, that's dirty bulking. That's the same logical fallacy with language.
When a person grows stronger week to week, it is proof that there is a positive change taking place inside of his muscles. Since muscles, by definition, lift weights, A muscle growing stronger can't be exactly the same muscle. If it were exactly the same muscle, it would be limited to lifting exactly the same weight.
Getting stronger, that word on its own, applies to any rep range and any exercise. It's not just 1RMs, it's not simply the power lifts, it's not doing contortionist arches on the bench press or very wide sumo on the deadlift. Getting stronger at anything is required to increase your muscle size. Even if you do sets of 15 with really long range of motion, super slow form, whatever you want to do, it doesn't matter. You have to get stronger within the given parameters of the exercise that you're doing. There's no other way to prompt growth. This is called progressive overload. That is simply a fancy term for getting stronger in some form, whether that's adding weight and or adding reps. That's it. Everybody across the board will agree you have to progressively overload to build muscle. Then you say, yeah, that's why you have to train for strength to get stronger. They lose their minds. And that's fitting because we have to discuss this as well. What is volume really? Because I still see people say this all the time. Oh, I like to do sets of 15 to 20, get some extra volume. Guys, reps are not volume. Volume in the context of weight training is measured across sets. A given rep range per set is not relevant when it comes to volume. You could do a set of 2 reps, you could do a set of 20 reps. Assuming you do the same number of sets for either of those, the total volume is the same. And this is foundationally why, if your volume keeps going up, your intensity has to keep going down. Because if you are going to push to a very high point of intensity per set, by default, you cannot keep up that same pace, so you could keep doing set after set after set and dropping the number of reps and realistically the weight over time, or you could reduce the number of sets, maybe say 2, and use the same weight and aim for the same number of reps per set, or maybe a relatively small drop-off, maybe 1 to 2 reps less from set 1 to set 2. And this is something that I like to program myself in my routines. I've got them for novices and intermediates linked down below. You can find tons of testimonials from happy guys that have used them and made great progress. Way more than just exercises on a sheet. I lay out everything you need to know to make serious gains over the long haul. But typically speaking, unless you're on a total bare bones program, I don't see a need of going beyond about 3 sets on a given exercise. And in the same way that people conflate higher reps with more volume, they also conflate progressive overload with adding volume as well. So people often say, oh, I progressively overloaded, I added a set compared to last week. That's not progressive overload. That is adding volume. And that's something to really keep in mind too. It's one of the biggest reasons why high volume oftentimes fails. You need to be in a range that you can consistently progressively overload and do so as reliably as you possibly can. And if you're always fatiguing yourself doing a ton of volume and your progressive overload suffers, your strength suffers, guess what? Your size also suffers. Even if in the moment you appear bigger from the edema, from the swelling, from the water retention, you look really good in the moment, you haven't actually built more muscle. And you can tell this because you cannot progressively overload. Oh, bro, I'm getting bigger, but I'm plateaued. Or, oh, bro, I'm getting bigger, but actually getting weaker. No, you're not. Well, to be fair, you might be getting bigger. You might be holding more water and or gaining fat. You're not gaining muscle, though. But this has been it for me, guys. Thank you for watching. Check out my training programs linked down below, as well as my Body Composition Bible full, very in-depth nutrition guide. Stop wasting your time in the kitchen and grocery store as well as the gym. And if you want to get in direct contact with me, the best ways to do so are linked down below as well. And I will catch you guys next time.